Hello and congratulations on a fourth annual convening of the World Emerging Security Forum. I wish I could be with you there in person in Seoul, and my warmest regards to my friend and colleague, Minister Cho. You know that this is a challenging time to be talking about emerging security and our geopolitical order, and that's because our institutions are not well aligned with the current balance of power. Geopolitical tensions are rising, and we don't have the global leadership to effectively respond. When that happens, you've got three different sorts of things you can do. First, you can look to rebuild your existing institutions, and some of that is happening, like NATO getting stronger after it was becoming more irrelevant for decades. You can build new institutions, like we see in this part of the world with the Quad, for example, or AUKUS, or you see from the Chinese developing the BRICS and Belt and Road. Or you can go to war, as we see happening in Europe, as we see happening in the Middle East. And of course, the problem is you can do all three of those things simultaneously, and that is what we are doing right now. I'd like to see a little more of the former than the latter. If there's good news, it's that the more you do of the latter, the more you recognize that building stronger institutions and building new institutions is a lot more important to do. So there is a feedback mechanism that we see. But still, in between having those new institutions while you see all this conflict is a very dangerous time, and one that we're going to need all of us to navigate. Now, one of the things that makes me feel more comfortable is the fact that the last 50 years of globalization has been more resilient than people think. Goods and services and ideas and capital and people are still moving around the world faster and faster, and that means more productivity and more efficiency. And even though there's a lot of political mistrust and we see a lot more weaponization of finance and the dollar and of tariffs and sanctions, we see even more than that an effort to ensure that everyone has access to new transformative technologies like artificial intelligence and like post-carbon energy. And those are moving forward, affecting every sector in every country. And the Americans are leading on AI at scale, mostly in the private sector. The Chinese are leading on post-carbon energy at scale. It's very hard to have a Cold War if almost every other country in the world needs to work with both the Americans and the Chinese. So ultimately, the next few years, I suspect, are going to be more challenging, more warlike, more fragmented, but ultimately also more global and more interdependent and more engaged. So we will need global leadership more than we have so far. I am perhaps most optimistic about using artificial intelligence for good, because it does have the capacity to improve our efficiency, our productivity, both as human beings, as well as industries in most every sector. And the amount of money that's going into it and the amount of benefits we see in use cases already, even in the infancy of this new revolution, only makes me more optimistic every time I meet with someone who's engaged with that technology. Having said that, we're going to need governance and institutions and leadership in AI too, and maybe even more starkly than in any other area. If the US and the Chinese are doing most of the driving, then we're going to need arms control agreements on AI, just like we did between the Americans and the Soviets. And we waited on that on the nuclear front. We didn't even get started until after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. We can't wait for that between the Americans and the Chinese and AI. We don't have that kind of time or that kind of resilience. Secondly, AI is a tool, unlike nuclear weapons, that everyone has access to. Everyone can use, and can use it for productive purposes and also for disruptive purposes. If you want to do that, you need to make sure that you have a more market-based organism that can help identify systemic risks to AI, communicate them to everyone that's relevant, and contain them. Like you have the Financial Stability Board for the global marketplace. We're going to need that for AI in the private and public sectors together. That's an area where I think South Korea is going to need to play a significant role going forward, and I hope they will. And then finally, we're going to need to align AI with our sustainable development goals for humanity. We have over 8 billion people on the planet right now. And while we've created a global middle class in the last 50 years of globalization, billions have still been left behind. The best chance to respond to that, to address it, is through artificial intelligence. But to make that happen, we need to have access for AI to the global south. We need to align artificial intelligence with our global sustainable development goals. And that means resources and analysis and data and compute and training for far more than the people and the companies that presently have access to it. That's a priority. It's something we've worked on globally through the United Nations, baby steps in the last couple of years, and the South Koreans have participated, and something I hope that we'll be putting a lot more resource into going forward. Because fundamentally, this is forward-looking. It's not about what we failed to do in past generations and past decades. It's about creating opportunities, productivity, and marketplaces for all the people on the planet. Ultimately, all we need is a longer range perspective if we want to see why we need to devote the resources to get this right. That's it for me, and I hope you have a great conference.